One of the concepts that I'm sure you have all heard in the context of Pesach matzahs, Pesach dika matzahs, matzahs for Passover, is the concept of matzah shmura. People think that matzah shmura has something to do with hand matzahs. That is a mistake. Machine matzahs can also be matzah shmura. What exactly is matzah shmura? What's it based on? It says in the verse, "Ushmartem es hamatzos." You have to guard the matzahs. And therefore, people are very, very careful with the matzah. From what? What are they concerned about? They're concerned that the grain has not come in contact with water. Because we know as soon as flour is mixed with water, a process of fermentation begins, or it can begin. So there are actually 3 different stages of shmura matzah. Ushmartem es hamatzos. You have to guard the matzahs. One stage is from the moment that the flour is mixed with water and the baking process begins, you have to guard. And we'll discuss that more later. What do you have to guard from? There's a more severe opinion. What does it mean, matzah shmur? You have to guard it, i.e. not to allow water to mix with flour from the moment that the grains are ground. The grinding of the grains in the old days, it was often done with water power. The mill was situated next to a river of water, and which caused the turbines or whatever it was to move, to rotate, and this caused the grinding of the grain. So from that moment, you have to be very careful, particularly because the grinding was generally taking place right next to a river of water. You have to be very, very careful not to allow any water to come in contact with the grains that you're grinding, i.e. with the flour that you're coming out with. That's a second opinion. The third opinion, matzah shmura, is matzah that was guarded from the time of the reaping. You've heard of Jack the Reaper. We're also involved in reaping, okay? From the time of the reaping, meaning you'll see these rabbis dressed in their cloaks, dressed in their dark, long suits, going into the field with and overseeing the cutting of the grain. From that moment, they are careful to see to it that the grain that's cut is kept away from water. Why the concern? The concern is, you have grain growing, and presumably it comes in contact with the rainwater, if not the irrigation water. So it doesn't start fermenting until it's ripe. Before it becomes ripe, the water just enhances the growth process, but it doesn't cause the wheat that's growing to ferment. But once it's totally grown, there is a fear that water coming in contact with the grain will cause it to start to ferment even before it's been ground. It's still attached to the ground. And therefore, when you see these rabbis with their long cloaks going into the fields and supervising the cutting of the wheat, they will be there shortly after Pesach, i.e. the early spring. If it's raining outside, can spring be far away? Who knows? We'll see. But be that as it may, early spring, they get out there and they oversee the cutting of the wheat, because if the grain is allowed to grow totally, the contact even with rainwater or irrigation water will begin the fermentation. This is their concern. So therefore, there are 3 stages in terms of defining matzah shmura, guarded matzah. Number 1, going backwards in the order that we went, number 1 is from the moment that the grain, that the flour is mixed with water. Number 2, more severe, is from the moment of the grinding of the grain, that we have to make sure no water comes in contact with the grain, with the ground flour. And number 3 is from the moment of the reaping. And we have to make sure that the reaping happens early in the spring. What happens if the rains are generally late? It happened maybe a year or 2 ago that the rains, maybe 3 years, the rains came very late in the winter. We had a lot of rain. But it didn't start until January, mid-January, and it went further than usual. Oh, that's exactly when the rabbis have to come into the fields and make sure that it's being harvested before a late rain. And what happens if they don't get there on time? What happens if the grains are already grown and they haven't been cut? You know what? They have to go to the Negev. They can't go to Beit Lechem. Beit Lechem, why is it called Beit Lechem? Because grains were grown over there. Usually barley was grown there, but also wheat, right? Wheat grows in Israel. If the rains are going late into the spring and the rabbis haven't overseen the cutting of the grains yet, so then they have to go into the Negev where there hasn't been rain, okay? So we just went through 3 different stages of shmura. Does it have anything to do with whether the matzah is going to be made by hand or by machine? Nothing. But people always say, Rabbi, I want shmura matzah. You want shmura matzah? We don't have anything else. Oh, no, I mean the round kind. Ah, now you're talking. But the matzah that's square, made by machine, that also is shmur matzah. Now, did you hear what I'm saying? What does this mean? This means, practically speaking, that matzah has to be more expensive because they can't use Canadian wheat. They can't import wheat from Canada because it's not going to be a high level of shmur. Who oversaw the reaping, right? Not Jack the Reaper. Right? Who oversaw the reaping, and who oversaw the grinding? Very often, it will have been ground in Canada or in Russia or in Ukraine or wherever it came from. Yes.
There's a lot of matzah that isn't called shmur matzah. Isn't advertised as shmur matzah.
It is advertised as
No,
shmur.
it's not.
Okay, so okay, we'll talk. I'll try to talk about that.
In America, especially.
Yeah, I'll try to talk about that. Okay, so now we hold the halacha, we hold as far as Jewish law is concerned, that only by the first night of Passover is there a Torahitic obligation to eat matzah. But Erev Tochlu Matzos, that night you have to eat matzah. It's talking about the night of the first Seder. If you keep a second Seder, the second Seder is only midrabanan. It's only by rabbinical. It's only minagav oseinu b'yodenu. We do it because Jews in Chutz La'aretz always keep 2 days. But the rest of the holiday, including the second day, and including the first day, beyond the matzah's mitzvah, the obligatory matzah that we eat, it's all not an obligation to eat matzah. Of course, you're not allowed to eat chametz, but there's no obligation to eat matzah. Do you understand that? There is an opinion, a very important opinion of the Vilna Gaon, of Elijah of Vilna. He said that every morsel of matzah that you eat is a mitzvah. But generally, we are not strict about that. Okay, meaning you're not obligated to eat matzah beyond the first night. Of course, what's going to be by Shabbos, when you have 3 meals, and you have to have hamotzi by the 3 meals, lechem mishnah, as on any other Shabbos. And what's going to happen on the days of Yom Tov, the daytime, and by the 7th day of Passover, the night and the day, you have to have lechem mishnah. You have to have two breads. We don't have bread, we have matzah. So you're going to have some matzah then by the meal. But it's not a mitzvah in terms of Passover, okay? Now, in fact, you can make matzah from any grain. But what is a grain? Is rice a grain? No. Millet? No. Why not? There are only 5 grains. What are they? Wheat, barley, spelt, oats, rye. Five different grains. And technically, you can make matzah from any one of them. Why from them? Because theoretically, if you mix water with them, they will ferment. So matzah is eating that which theoretically could potentially become chametz. But we were careful to see that it did not become chametz. You hear that? Millet or rice will not ferment. They don't ferment. So therefore, they're not acceptable to eat for matzah. You understand what I just said? Only something that theoretically can become chametz may you eat as matzah, having seen to it that it didn't rise. Now, making matzah, it is preferred to use wheat. Wheat is considered the ideal. So says the Ramah in the Shulchan Aruch, that it's best to use wheat. But theoretically, people that have an allergy or they're not good with wheat, they can do it with spelt. They can do it with anything, any one of the 5 grains. Now, perhaps you've heard the concept of an 18-minute. That 18 minutes you're allowed to allow the matzah, the flour and dough, to remain unattended once they get mixed. This is a very misleading concept, okay? Because as soon as the process begins, wherein there is the touching of hands, hand matzah, the touching of hands, the hands are mixing it and then working it, and then cutting it into discs, and then rolling it. As soon as the hand comes in contact with the matzah, with the dough, there is a problem of fermentation. It will not ferment so long as you're working it. You can work it all day long, and it will not become chametz. But if you leave it unattended, 18 minutes, it'll become chametz, and then problematic, okay? Now, if life was simple, we could say, okay, big deal. So I'll just see to it that from beginning to end, the process takes less than 18 minutes. But once again, if I'm working it, it doesn't count, right? It can take longer than 18 minutes. It's not problematic. However, there is a problem in halacha, in Jewish law, because one of the great early commentaries, the Rosh, Rabbeinu Osher, who was an Ashkenazi, but he lived in Spain. He had to run away from Germany and then had to run away from France. The church was out to get him, and he went to Spain, and he became the chief rabbi of Spain, even though he was an Ashkenazi. Who could imagine such a thing? Yeah. Anyway, the Rosh held that if you leave the dough unattended for any amount of time, we suspect maybe it became chametz. Okay? I went to Rabbi Yoshiv, the great posek, about 40, maybe close to 50 years ago. And I asked him, what does it mean, any amount of time, that the dough left unattended is already problematic? What does it mean, any amount of time? Does it mean 5 seconds? I asked him. He said, listen, the Torah wasn't given to angels. We're only human beings. To let the dough stand unattended for 5 seconds, we can't do better than that. Am I allowed a minute? No, that's too long. Half a minute? Yes, that's it. If the dough remains on the tables where it's being worked for a half a minute without being attended, then without being worked, we don't want that. We are concerned lest it became chametz. Okay, now we have to realize, what's this 18-minute concept that's so often used? It was made in less than 18 minutes. Who cares about 18 minutes? I just mentioned the Mishnah Berurah actually holds the halacha, it's Jewish law. If it's left unattended for any amount of time, which Rabbi Yosef defined as half a minute, it's problematic. So what's this 18 minutes? The 18 minutes is an opinion that we are strict in its regard, that says that all of the times that the dough was left unattended, 5 seconds here, 15 seconds over there, 20 seconds over there, 4 seconds over there, it all adds up. And if it adds up to 8, it's 18 minutes unattended, chametz. We are concerned, okay? So therefore, in the hand baking process, the workers are working very, very quickly. And it's almost like a production belt. And it's amazing the way they do it. They're working really, really hard, and it's very physical. I asked the head of a matzah bakery, the Yeshiva just baked matzah on Sunday morning. I asked the head of the bakery, what's your biggest problem? He told me, getting workers. They have to be Jewish because they have to make the matzah for the sake of the mitzvah. Well, yeah? Okay. So, what's the problem? Find Jews that are willing to do physical labor. That's what he says to me. That's the most difficult problem that they have in the matzah bakery. Okay, so you see, there are at least 25, 30 workers in a typical bakery at the various stages. And it's a tough thing for him to find workers. Be that as it may, the price is a function of how many people are working. Obviously, the price, okay? And the price has not gone up that much over the years. You can get matzah, good quality matzah, for 145 shekel. But there's one other factor. Rabbi Eid, what's going on? Yeah? How many timeouts am I allowed? Okay. Yeah? Okay, so you got to know one thing, which is that there are 2 different ways of making hand matzah. One is by grinding the grain by machine. Now, technically, that doesn't have to be done for the sake of the mitzvah. Working for the sake of the mitzvah, the matzah, we hold that the matzah has to be made for the sake of the mitzvah, the first night of Pesach. And the grinding of the grain is not necessarily an important element. But if it's done by machine, okay, obviously you're just pushing a button with whatever intent you have. The machine is doing the work. But grinding it by hand, there are a lot of people that hold that it should be ground by hand, not by machine. Okay? The process of making hand matzah should be done entirely by hand. Who does that? Do you know how difficult it is to grind grain by hand? You have 2 different stones and you're going over it and over it. You know what they get? They get the young kids that are playing hooky from school and want to make some money. No reasonable adult is willing to do that. You understand? So you have these 13, 14-year-olds. Okay, Rabbi Ethan is here, Rabbi Moshe Chaim is here. I can't say what I'd like to say. I'd like to say that you have people coming into the bakery And they see this little kid that's doing it. And of course, matzah has to be made with intention for the mitzvah. And a katan, a youngster, we don't assume that he has a sufficiently developed mind to have the proper intention. So you have this Hasidic Rebbe that's going in there, and he's making for his whole community, and you have a little kid grinding the matzah because he's the only one that's willing to do it, right? And are you 13 years old? And the kid says, yes. When was your bar mitzvah? 2 years ago. But you don't look it. Can you? I don't want to say. Okay, let's make believe this isn't going to be seen. They'll make him pull down his pants and show that he already has pubic hairs growing. Okay? Now, on to the next topic. Okay? The next topic is, remember I said that the matzah, the mitzvah, is only by the first night. Beyond that, it's a good thing. If you make another Seder, it's by rabbinic law. Okay, but the rest, you don't have to eat matzah. But when can you make the matzah? Theoretically, you make it for the sake of the mitzvah because maybe it's going to be used by people for the night of the Seder. But when do you make the matzah? The matzah bakeries, even before Hanukkah, they're already baking. Can you imagine? You're getting matzah that's not necessarily that fresh. They're already baking. Yeah, give me a 2-minute warning. Okay? 2? Now? Okay. Yeah. So here's what we have to realize. That the matzah baking ideally should be done in the month before Passover. That's why we bake on the 19th of Adar, within a month. But there's an opinion that says that it has to be baked on the afternoon before Pesach begins. And that's an opinion that's based on a hekesh. The Torah talks about you shall slaughter the Paschal offering, and 7 days you shall eat matzah. So the Gemara learns from that an opinion that says, when can you slaughter the Paschal offering? Only the afternoon before Passover. So you eat the korban at night. Yeah? That's the time when you have to make the matzahs. There is such an opinion. And the Mishnah Berurah goes out of his way to say that most poskim don't hold like that. But Hasidic Jews go out of their way to get their 3 matzahs for the Seder from Erev Pesach. There's Rabbi Moshe Chaim. He's telling us. Mitzvah. It's from mitzvah. But the Mishnah Berurah himself says it's not necessary. Both poskim say it's not necessary. But a Hasidic Jew will get it. That's why Rabbi Moshe Chaim gets it for himself. That's why my sons-in-law get it from me. Okay. How much does a matzah cost? Hand matzah. At least 10 shekel a piece. At least 10 shekel a piece for matzah, okay? Now, the matzah, you got to realize, 10 shekel is a lot of money for a piece, for a round matzah. Okay? How much of it do you have to eat at the Seder? Excuse me? You have to eat 5 kezesim. 5 kezesim. And which is 5 olive volumes. 5 olive volumes, that's like 2 whole matzahs of hand matzah. Okay? Machine matzah, it's like 3 or 4. Okay? I'm almost finished. I just want to say that this holiday, you get people like Aish Torah students to come to the bakery and they want to do something. You got to realize if you're not a professional and you start rolling the rolling pin and it gets out of shape, the guy at the end of the line, who's the finisher, right? He ain't going to be able to fix it. That means your matzahs won't be good. It'll be thick on one side, thin on another side. Yeah? That's why when you go to a matzah bakery, even if you want to oversee it, you can oversee it. But to actually participate, you have to learn how to do it. And early in the season, the workers, they learn how to do it. And that's why we leave it up to the workers. And when we come, we're only mashkiach.